What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Game Dev Unchained, the #1 game development podcast about game development and the lifestyle thereof. I am your host, Brandon Pham, and with me, two special guests, Demid and Marina. How you guys doing?
Cool. Doing great. Thanks for having us.
All right. So this is the part of the podcast where I ask our guests, which is yourselves, about yourself, where you've been, where you at, where you heading. Just a little introduction to our viewers and listeners out there.
So, Demid, please go ahead first.
No worries. Yeah. So I'm Demid. I'm a co-founder of Allcorrect. Just founded this company with my friend 17 years ago. So basically, we're a service business. Helping other game developers and publishers to ship their games. They're awesome games. And also I'm an indie developer for the last 7 years on the side, making my own stuff. So that's about it, I guess.
Okay.
So I'm Marina.
I live in Ireland with my 3 kids and a dog. And there you go, Marina.
That was important part to add. Thank you. So I'm Marina. I'm head of localization production at Allcorrect. With Allcorrect for 6.5 years now, and I've started as a project manager and slowly made my way to management. I love everything localization related, video games, languages, different cultures. So I enjoy every day of my work. And it's quite easy to do what you love. That's it.
All right.
I'm based in Serbia.
So there's a lot of question here. It sounds like your team is remote. Has it always been like that? Or do you guys have a unified office somewhere?
We have COVID to thank for that, I guess. So Demid was remote for many years. And if you want to share the story of you moving to Ireland, please go ahead.
I mean, we are remote and we are not. So it's a mixed bag, I would say. So we do have offices and presence in different countries. So our production HQ is currently in Serbia, in Novi Sad, which is a beautiful place. And I'm based in Ireland. One of my business partners is based in Toronto, Canada. So some other people in Spain, in other countries. So a lot of spread all over the globe, I would say. As we probably should. We're helping developers ship their games worldwide, right? So why not be spread around the globe?
Yeah. So your specific discipline, your guys' specific field is definitely a huge part of game development that doesn't really get discussed much, right? I think at least with internal teams, it's kind of like a big mystery, at least to me, working in these bigger teams, like AAA teams, I never really have any insight on that side, but it's actually pretty integral to kind of have a global scale recognition of your game in these different areas and different languages to kind of make it work. Can you kind of provide some background into this?
Absolutely. Yeah, industry? Absolutely. Yeah. I will start maybe high level, and then Marina will help me with the specifics. But generally, I think game localization is a thing that is very often overlooked, and it's something that you don't notice until it's really bad, or unless it's really bad, right? So it's like with it's the same with basically any sort of translation or interpretation. If it's there, you just think, that's normal. That's I gather these, I get this information, I process it, I hear it, I enjoy it, whatever. You don't really notice that it's there, right? So as soon as it gets screwed up, that's when you notice it's missing. So I think that's one of the reasons why translations in general and game localization in particular is a bit overlooked. But also I think there's one thing that localization normally comes in at the end of the development cycle, right? Because you normally need maybe 80% of the text content locked in before you engage a localization team. And you know yourself very well, Brandon, that a lot of games, most games get delayed. Some get delayed like 120, 200% of the original, allotted timeline and time budget. So by the time it gets to localization, the game is already late for shipment, right? Late for publishing. So everybody's rushing it up, and then the people kind of think, oh, we also need this localized, So it's a bit of an afterthought. It's not part of the core development process, at least in the producer's head, maybe heads, or I don't know, in project managers' heads, in heads of production, I don't know, game designers. It's still a mystery even to me. I don't know, but it's hard to say. It's probably art and programming and game design are more visible from in pre-production stages. That's why localization is not. I don't know, Marina. Do you have any thoughts on this? What do you think?
Yes, I only have to agree with all you said, because by the time we receive the text, most of the deadlines are already missed. And the only thought is we have to release as soon as possible. Please do whatever to increase our chances to release as soon as possible. So, and localization is a little bit more expensive than you think. And by the time the game is ready for release, the budgets sometimes, in many cases, are already a little bit tight. So yes, localization is a difficult process, and it is a problem, especially with indie developers who release their games for the first time. People just don't think of localization far in advance, and that's a pity, because it's very interesting, and if planned well, you have all the opportunities to release in different markets at once and save a little bit in marketing.
So basically, we're in a tight corner as a service provider that provides localization service, because it's a crunch multiplied by a crunch is the biggest crunch you can imagine always. So development teams may start easy and nice and relaxed, and then they start crunching before the release, but because we come late in the development cycle, we're always crunching because everybody wants stuff shipped fast and localization done very quick. And sometimes it's just not possible to deliver the best result, so we do whatever we can. But sometimes, even I remember our first gaming project was Age of Conan Hyborian Adventures, and that was in 2008. And it had about 900,000 words, which we needed localized from English into Russian. And man, we had 3 months to do that or something like that. So I think, and there was no way the publisher was going to move this deadline. So I think there were 11 translators and 3 or 4 editors working on this localization, and also proofreaders and project managers and stuff. And it's not the best practice to say the least.
Is that a average team, if you would describe a typical project where you're receiving a script in this case, right, and you have to translate it to a certain language? Is it usually looking at 11 translators and 3 editors per language, or is it just every language that you have to translate it to?
Well,
how does it
depends.
Work? Yeah,
it really depends on the volume, depends on the deadlines, depends on the projects, because for smaller projects, of course, the less people are involved in the process, the better the final quality is. But we have a process that allows us to manage the final quality even with a bigger team. So a typical mobile game with not a lot of words. For example, a mobile game with free-to-play model, which has like weekly events or bi-weekly events. We will have like project manager working with the clients, with the developers. We will have one or two linguists working on this particular project, and that's it.
Language.
And
you mean per target language?
Yeah, I mean per one language. And of course, we do multi-language localization. So if the game requires several languages, it's several teams of linguists working at once.
Yeah, so I think I would add, it's not so much the number of people on the team producing the localization goes not into kind of horizontal scaling where you have a lot of translators working on the same title, but it's rather, you have a terminology specialist working to analyze the original game and to create a glossary of all the terms in the game. And there is the translator who translates the content, and then there is the editor who edits it, or a quality control specialist who does spot checks to see if there are any issues, and then there is a proofreader, and then maybe some other people, like maybe there is a subject matter expert. Say if we're translating a game about history, right, with a lot of historical content, or a sports game or a racing game, there will be a lot of specialist terms that even the best translator wouldn't always get right 100% of the times. So we need also like to have subject matter experts on the team. So yeah, the number, even in the best case scenario, we will still have quite a bit of, quite a big size team, but it's not because the content is split, unless again the deadlines are tight, and then we have to just think on our feet and do whatever we can to deliver the best result possible, which is, sometimes just good enough, but we're doing whatever we can. It's generally, I think, a good idea to have no more than, say, 3 translators per one editor, because then when it goes above that, you need 2 editors to harmonize the text, and the style and everything. And then who's gonna harmonize the editor's text, right? Then you need it's endless, So
it's a pyramid.
Yeah, it's a kind of a Ponzi scheme even. So we would try to avoid those as much as possible. So and then typically Marina mentioned, mobile games. Mobile games they usually have like 10 or languages or more, depending on the publisher, of course, but like middle-sized, bigger sized publishers have 10, 15 languages maybe. We usually know not less than 7 or 8, normally, unless it's an independent, like a small indie game. So they generally want us to deliver multi-language localizations simultaneously in all those languages. And that's actually where our, I would say, DNA comes from. Because if you compare us to some bigger localization companies, service companies, even like public service companies working in the game space, they usually started as maybe local country distributors for games, right? So they distribute physical copies of games on floppy disks and CDs and stuff. And they had, and they usually specialized in 1 or 2 languages for their specific territories, say for Italy or for Germany, for Spain. And then when the things got into digital distribution, and when it was easy to sim ship games globally, especially with mobile games, where you just check the boxes in your Google Play console or Apple Developer Console, and boom, it goes live everywhere. With these games, I think not all of the competitors could scale their competence to do all of these. So some of them can, but it's hard because they can do their narrow thing very, very well, and they can also do like amazing voiceovers and amazing things like that. And kudos to them. It's great, but we come from, say, multilingual first approach, I would say.
Mm-hmm. So do you guys cover mostly text-to-text translation, or do you guys provide dubbing or in-engine development? Like what is the usual case scenario for you guys?
Maria?
Well, for us, we mostly do text translation just because there is more game content in the form of text. We do dubbing, but as Demid already mentioned, first of all, not all the games require dubbing. Not every game can afford voiceover, especially multilingual voiceover. We work with our partners, some studios in Ireland and Canada, to have like actors from all over the world dubbing the games in English and Spanish and so on. But that is like 3% of our games that require voiceover. Unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, when you ask this question, Brandon, it's we all need to keep in mind, like, what's the biggest chunk of games there in the market now? Like, what's the biggest thing? What is it? It's mobile games, right? So mobile games are growing the fastest. They have the biggest chunk of the market. And people playing mobile games, they don't usually have their headphones plugged in, so they play they play on silent and stuff. And a lot of them are also like casual games with not so much, they're little and no cutscenes at all and things like that. So a lot of them are puzzle games, evergreen puzzle genres, like solitaires and stuff like that. Like you wouldn't normally get dubbing there. That said, I would say even mobile games sometimes have voiceover. Like, for example, one of our favorite customers is Nordcurrent. They have these amazing hidden object games, right? Like Murder in the Alps and Murder by Choice, that have maybe like they're huge. They have maybe 100 million players or something. And they have English voiceover, which we record in Dublin. And you may be surprised, but players get really attached to the way it works in console and PC gaming. Actually, we were surprised to see that players of Murder in the Alps, they're in love with the character, with the voice actor doing the voice for these protagonists, right? So when Nordcurrent switched to us for voiceover, we had to keep the voice actress, right, and the voice talent, and that was really interesting. That came as a surprise to me.
Mm-hmm. So just to kind of understand like a little bit more, you guys mentioned like the culturalization. Can you explain more about that aspect in game localization? How that affects, instead of just text to text translation, there's sensitivity issues that surrounds that as well.
I see Marina smiling. She probably has some good stories to tell. I have a couple as well, and I will chime in later.
Well, text to text requires culturalization as well, because every game has a rating, every game has its content that could be considered a little bit offensive in this country. For example, drinking in German is not really well perceived for the games with lower age ratings. And it requires a lot of knowledge of what we can and what we cannot do in this particular market. So even the text localization requires a lot of thought about the culture. But what we do as well is culturalization analysis. It could be done at early stages of the development when we send the game build over to our specialists. They play a little bit and give their feedback about what could be considered offensive. For example, the mask in the game location should not be should be the tallest building and the other buildings should not be taller, for example, that. And we had a really funny case. We finished a culturalization analysis just before the COVID hit, and there was an antagonist in that game wearing a hazmat suit. And it was an antagonist and really, really bad guy in the game. And everything went great there. But when the COVID began and people wearing hazmat suits started to be considered heroes, like doctors and the essential workers. So we immediately wrote to the clients and said, well, let's reconsider that scheme because it could be considered offensive nowadays. Like everything changed now. And they did. And the game was quite well perceived, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, I can chime in with a couple more examples what culturalization adds to the table. One example I remember when we were doing Valiant Hearts, localizing Valiant Hearts for Ubisoft into one of the languages, we had like two. Well, the Valiant Hearts is an adventure game about World War I, right? Which Ubisoft, one of our favorite clients, they were one of the few game companies actually globally who paid attention to the centenary anniversary of the First World War, and they made this amazing game about a German character, a French character, and that there was a dog, and there were just during the First World War, and there was romance, and there was families were breaking up and people were dying. It was very, very touching adventure game with simple mechanics, but very, very powerful characters and story. And we had history specialists, experts consulting us and working on the game. But also for the game, we expanded the encyclopedia. So the game comes with an encyclopedia of concepts and things that were meaningful 100 years ago, right? Which people don't even wear today. They don't even know what these things meant. So we expanded this encyclopedia and suggested some replacements in this encyclopedia, say for the Eastern European audiences to make more sense to them, because they, the uniform, what kind of uniform they wore was different from, say, French soldiers or from what German soldiers wore. So that's culturalization for you. And quite recently, I think we just finished, or we haven't even finished working on a project. I can't unfortunately name the client; it's under NDA. But we have been working on a historical game, a very famous franchise. So they're making a new title in the franchise, and the specific title, is developed by a Chinese developer. And the development team is great; it's amazing, but they have their own perspective of things, especially, and of their different historical perspective on things. But this history themed video game is to be shipped globally. So we don't want people to get offended. We don't want players to get triggered, and we also, this is kind of the reactive part. We don't want trouble for our clients, for the game companies, right? But we also want the games to be kind of better and more accessible and more fun, which is proactive side of culturalization, right? So we don't only look for red flags. Like Koreans and Japanese have a thing about territory and about sea, and they have wars in their history and stuff. So it's important what you call these people who are famous historical figures and generals and things like that. But also we want to celebrate in the game. We want to celebrate these famous historical figures and explorers. Make sure that they're not made fun of, and that their achievements are highlighted in a nice way, which it can be very tricky, especially when you come to representatives of smaller nations, say in the Pacific, and things like that. So yeah, it was a tricky, very interesting project. We had like we have a narrative design team as well. So we had like our narrative lead and narrative designers working together with the localization team to adapt. And essentially, we had to rewrite the whole text content in the game, basically, because the original one was not really appropriate.
Yeah. For those who, I guess we go back to the beginning a bit. Like, I'm curious how, because this is a very interesting part of the industry. How did you guys get started in game localization? Like there wasn't really a clear path in my mind of how about I would go into this field,
right?
If I had to start now,
yeah. I can tell you a few bits about this because I'm co-founder. So I my background was linguistics, and philology and the English language. So I worked for a bit in a English teaching school for adults for a while, and then my good friend Dennis actually he was nudging me a bit and saying, what do you think of translation, stuff? Why don't you translate things? And I'm like, oh man, listen, that's very different from teaching the English language, So it requires different competences. I don't know anything about this market. But then he was very, very persistent, and he didn't have any incentive in this. He was just my friend, and he was kind of showing me the opportunity. So in the end, I surrendered and I said, "Hey, Dennis, you know what? I'm starting this translation business, and I want you in. Are you in?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, sure." So he jumped on board. He has got no relation to linguistics whatsoever. He's like a construction materials and production technology specialist. Very, very different world. So, long story short, we started this translation company together. Then we had our first person employee on board. That was in 2016, 17 years ago. Then we started just translating stuff. It could be technical documentation, could be other stuff. But then already 2 years later, we localized Age of Conan, and then we just got very lucky because there were these MMORPGs from China and Korea getting very popular. Things like Perfect World, and things like Ica Online and Jade Dynasty, and these big games. They had huge word counts, but not many companies knew how to localize stuff using Chinese or Korean as the source language, because normally how localization companies work, they translate stuff from English into the target languages. So the source is usually English, whereas in this case, the source was Chinese or Korean. And essentially, a lot of our competitors just didn't know how to do that. So we jumped at that opportunity, and sure as hell, we were messing things up half the time. We had a lot of issues. Some clients weren't happy. Maybe a couple of clients left, unfortunately. But then we were learning very quickly, so we started doing localizing these MMORPGs, and then they started to decline, and then mobile games were on the rise. Say maybe around 2010 or something, they started growing very exponentially, And as I mentioned before, these companies were usually on the smaller side. They didn't have as many resources as many resources to manage localization very meticulously, and like hiring one vendor to do one language and hiring another to do Arabic and hiring one more to do French and whatever. So they usually wanted to have one local vendor to do all of the languages. And they also wanted them to be simultaneously shipped and with a good enough quality for all these players worldwide to be happy. So we saw that as an opportunity as well and jumped in. And we didn't know how to do that at first, and then we learned. Again, we tried to learn very quickly. So I would say, that's how. And then we dropped everything else over all these years. Then we dropped all the other things that we were doing, non-gaming related. So we focused on the gaming vertical. So we currently do only work with game companies, and we not only do translations, right? So we do narrative design, we do in-game art production, like 2D, 3D art, concept art, those type of projects, some QA, but still localization, I think, is at our heart, I would say. So I think that's more or less the our story. And I got really, really lucky getting people on board on the team, like Marina here. Marina is our head of production for localization services. So I would say 2/3 of the company work under her, leadership. Maybe half the company at least, So and she's super professional, and there are many other people like her. So I'm super happy to be so lucky. So we have about 100 people now in the company, and they're all very, very super talented. I'm amazed how talented they are. Yeah.
What are the main languages? You guys mentioned before, like if they are looking for multi-language support, it was a number between 7 to 10. What languages are those exactly?
This one's for Marina, I think. Yeah.
Well, the main tier is like basic European languages like French, German, Spanish, and Chinese, Korean, and Japanese. These are must languages for most of the games that are released in different countries, just because
Italian, don't forget Italian. I mean,
Italian is decreasing now, unfortunately. Okay. I don't know why. It's a pity, because I'm currently in Italy, and it's a real pity. But yeah, Italian is like second tier language now. I hope I'm safe saying that here. But yeah, in the recent years, there were changes. For example, European Spanish is a little bit replaced by generic Latin American Spanish, just because there are more players there. Turkish has been popular for the last 3 years. And now the South Asian languages like Indonesian, Thai are very popular, especially with mobile games, just because people play more mobile games there.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like people in these locations, players in these locations have never had access to, say, proper consoles like, PlayStations and Nintendo, whatever. So they didn't have nothing. They didn't have a PCs or whatever. And now they have these mobile phones and stuff. So they can play, and they do play on mobile phones, usually, on Android phones, I think, because they're cheaper. So they're obviously not as lucrative as a market in terms of average revenue per user, but there is so many users and they're growing quickly. And then also, I think these territories getting richer and richer. So these are kind of, they're developing countries, but they're, the dynamics are really good. So I think this is where the future lies, more or less. People used to talk about Africa as well, but I don't think it's on the table just yet. I'm pretty sure it will be at some point in the future, but so far it hasn't been too much of an influence, really. Yeah, it's funny, Marina, you mentioned this Italian, and it's totally in line with what I heard. I just flew back from GDC in San Francisco a few weeks ago, and I was meeting clients, old and new. And there was one client who said, like, oh yeah, we have for this huge game, we have like for European languages, they have like EFGS, which totally breaks the acronym EFIGS, which was ubiquitous, all over the place. It was like, EFIGS, English, French, Italian, German, Spanish, and E for Italian was the only vowel there, so that kind of made it a word, like EFIGS, Oh yeah, except for English as well, but it kind of was easy to pronounce. And now it's like EFGS. So shall I say FEGS or GFs? I don't know. Like it screws things up big time. It's a pity.
Mm. Is it pretty common to see trends? Some languages being, it sounds like it, that some languages over time gets more popular because of the growing gaming market there, and then others decrease. Has it been sort of
decreasing? Not so much, I would say. Would you agree, Marina? I think
overall increase.
There's more demand of more rare languages now. For example, Polish. A couple of years ago, we analyzed the user sentiment on Apple Store and Google Play, and we can find all the language requests, and we analyze that, and there are trends there for sure. Like Polish and Turkish were a trend 3 years ago. Now, don't know.
Yeah,
Turkish is unfortunately decreasing a little bit.
What about Arabic, Marina? What do you think?
Well, Arabic is a little bit tricky, and we've hosted like a localization convention several years ago, and we had an expert of Arabic expert saying that the Arabic players are very happy when the game has Arabic, just very happy it exists. So it's very, very rewarding. And of course, there are a lot of players and a lot of potential money running there. But Arabic is very, very tricky to localize into. It's very tricky to adapt your gaming engine to process Arabic properly, just because it's right to left writing, and the writing is very tricky, and there are not a lot of fonts that could be processed. And if in the line of Arabic words there is, for example, an English words, most of the game engines just go crazy and put everything back left to right. So it's not very hard to localize into Arabic, but it's very hard to add Arabic in the game properly. So it requires additional steps of localization, quality assurance, several steps. And we had some bad luck with Arabic in the beginning, just because it's a very complicated language, and there is modern standard Arabic, which is like the written language, the language where the news in the Arabic countries are. But each country, like Egypt, Syria, and so on, have their own, not dialects, but their own language, their own language. And if we are localizing a game which has a lot of contemporary lexics like slang or memes and so on, it is very hard to make the game appealing to players from different countries. So we've created a separate process for Arabic when we have a translator from one country and editor from another country, just because we want to avoid those regionalisms. But it's still quite difficult to achieve the beneficial results that could work in every country. So Arabic could be quite rewarding, but it takes a long time to localize into and process.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in with the thing. Well, basically, localization is always a question of return on investment, right? So it's always a balance of, okay, this is how much we need to spend on localization engineering to make sure our game supports these fonts and these character sets and these whatever. The user interface is adaptable, and then we need to find and pay these, localization vendors, or maybe hire an internal team, et cetera, et cetera. So these are the costs of it, and then there's the potential benefit you can get out of the market. So there's always a big unknown there, because nobody can predict with certainty how it's going to perform. It's just we've seen over the time that second tier languages were kind of getting stronger and kind of just staying there. So whereas earlier, say even like 15 years ago or 10 years ago, first tier languages were like, a must have, and then second tier languages were like more rare. Now it's like second tier languages are almost like, they're much more widespread, and then you have extra languages on top, which are kind of third-tier languages or second-tier languages, which are very often used as well. But seeing languages getting out of favor, out of fashion for localization is, I would say, is very rare. I don't remember any cases except for this Italian thing. But yeah, getting back to these languages selection, we do help to, Marina mentioned, we try to go kind of start from the bottom, from the player. I mean, I should probably have said from the top, from the player, but anyway, I mean, the bottom of the market, basically, where we have these tools that automatically parse reviews on Google Play, on Apple Store, on the App Store, on Steam, some other stores to automatically select reviews that mention languages, mention localization, mention voiceover, things like that. And then we automatically translate them and we automatically mark them using algorithms, including using machine learning to mark them as like positive sentiment about localization or negative, or requests for new languages. So then we can get that analytics together and then combine it with our experience of localizing other games in this genre, and then we can get back to the client and say, hey, based on our experience working in your genre, and also having analyzed players' feedback and player reviews, we can recommend you. And also we have, of course, store analytics, like we have paid subscriptions to like things like App Annie and or similar, so that we can also analyze how different games are performing in different territories. So we combine all of that and kind of give recommendations. So we don't, of course, kind of guarantee anything, but we can, do a good job of just being reasonable and recommending things that are likely to succeed in different territories, languages that are going to be profitable.
I have a question about the unique aspects of game development, how that intersects with the localization process. How do you guys manage the localization process for games that have ongoing updates, expansions, especially for mobile games, right? They're constantly updating every month or two.
Yeah. Marina, I think it's for you.
We just deal with it. Well, it's not really hard, actually, because we have processes and we have good communication with the developers. It's crucial to have a person on the developer side who's responsible for that. And we can adjust our process or just request something additional to do our jobs better. But basically how it works is like we are sent the files for localization. It could be any format. It could be script. It could be part of the code with the words written in it. Like any content that should be localized is sent over to us with additional materials like game assets, pictures, some context, what these buttons do. And at the beginning of the game, we have a huge project specs filled in just for us to understand better what are the expectations of the final results, what is the target audience, what is the main vibes we're going for. It's very long. It has over 70 questions, but it helps us to do the job better and to fit in the expectations. So, and with the weekly updates, it's not really a problem because we have all the specs already confirmed. We have the team of project managers and linguists. We work in a special tools like computer-assisted translation tools, and it helps us to keep consistency throughout the translations. Like Demid mentioned, creating glossary already. Glossary is like a list of all the game-specific terms like character names, locations, achievements, currency. So every single time this word is mentioned in the text, it should be translated as it was before, so the players are not confused. So these computer assessment tools help us to check these things and just make our job a little bit easier and make us help us to guarantee the quality we usually guarantee. And that is basically how it works. And with the games with weekly updates, it's not like one pack of text sent over once a week. It's never like that. It's like 5,000 words on Monday, and next day, here are 10 lines we forgot. And on Wednesday, here are like 20 lines we decided to edit. And here is the marketing line. Here's the push notifications we need to localize. And we also localize all of the marketing surrounding the events and the game release. So it's very intense sometimes, but it's part of our job. And it's like really how we live, and there's nothing wrong about it. Like project managers working with 15 linguists at once for one project, even if it's like 10 words, well, okay, no problem. We know how to do that.
Well, Marina, let's be okay. Frankly, it is a problem, right? I mean, we can tackle it, but it can be a pain in the ass, like to be completely fair. But I mean, it's something. Sometimes it's unavoidable, but it doesn't mean that it's always fun and easy, right? So
don't tell the managers, please.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a cakewalk exactly, right? So, for example, EA is one of our old customers, and we sometimes do like 50 jobs a day for them. What's usually, I think, we do about 50 jobs a day, and they can be as small as Marina said, like translate these 10 words, like a marketing phrase, into these languages, or it can be as big as here's this new title, content pack for this big title that we're doing. Like, for example, we do Apex into Korean, I think, and The Sims into Swedish, or if I'm not mistaken.
We used to do it for Norwegian.
Norwegian, yeah. Sorry if there are any Swedes around or Norwegians listening. I'm very sorry. Anyway, it's hard, 50 jobs a day. And I mean, even there are small jobs, they need to be delivered on time or before, and with no quality issues. So that's tricky. And how we do it, I mean, there are several things that Marina mentioned, like translation environments, tools where translators work on the translation, and where we have the glossaries, where you have the translation memory that remembers the previous translations and stuff like that. But also, we try to be very proactive in terms of automation. And for example, we always will offer our clients to synchronize our content management systems. So even, for example, like with one of the big clients, it was a big pain, and we were at a point where we wanted to terminate working with this client, actually, because it was so painful. There were so many jobs a day, and they needed to be manually imported. The text strings needed to be imported, exported, checked, kicked around different tools and stuff. It was a nightmare. But then we just basically sat down with the client and said, hey, how about our localization engineers work with you guys to write an API that will synchronize the text strings from your engine and in our, in the translation environment. And then it worked very quickly. And a month or two later, the client was profitable immediately, and I think our project managers saved, I don't know, at least 50% of their time now. They freed up their hands for the more important stuff. So that's one of the, one example how you can really, just do things quicker. And also there is this internal things going behind the scenes where we have project management tools and stuff, and actually very, devoted, very professional project managers who will, observe the deadlines. They would maybe wake up earlier, or, we have shifts as well with project managers. So, with some clients, I remember we had like 1 or 2 points in the day when we were delivering content, So say if they send us jobs before 12 o'clock before midday, we will be able to deliver them a translation into 10 languages or so by the end of the day, the same day, if it's under, say, I think 1,000 words, if I remember correctly. So that's very tricky because you need to work with people in different time zones. Like, for Japanese, you work with people living in Japan, and for Brazilian Portuguese, you work with Brazilians living in Brazil, and that's, as far from Japan as you can get. So that's tricky, but if with the right planning, you can kind of manage it, I think.
With the you guys were mentioning this before. You guys touched every piece of the market. Recently, you guys are focusing a lot more on mobile. But are there any key differences with localizing a game between PC, console, and mobile platforms?
Oh, sure. Marina knows about
it. Well, timing is one of the biggest differences because, mobile games are constantly updating, constantly adding content, and everything is so much quicker there. And the teams are working in sprints, and almost every sprint ends in localization. This is in terms of process, and the bigger publishers that publish bigger games regularly, and they learned about localization the hard way, like 10 years ago. They now have more sophisticated planning and more schedules, and the process is a little bit smoother just because it's not us telling them, please, let's do that to increase the quality. It's like they say, we want to do that. We're just happy about it. So the process is different, and depending on the quality of localization process inside the developer team, just because in some companies, if it's their first game, for example, there is no one responsible for localizations. Like that poor guy who was told, just send them over the files. And we are asking him 70 questions about what do you want your localization to be. And that's a little bit tricky, and that requires a little bit adjusting our processes a little bit. The physical space for the text in mobile games is smaller for sure, and especially when we're localizing the games from Chinese, where 2 characters could mean the world, and we cannot just put a whole phrase in that space. So you may be noticed that there are a lot of abbreviations in that kind of games, and it doesn't really look beautiful in most cases, but that's just because it was like 3 Chinese characters, and we have to keep the meaning as much as we can. Else, there are some complicated processes of compliance for console games, like for Nintendo Switch, for PlayStation, and there is a list of special terminology, like how the controller should be called controller and not gamepad, and so on. It's different for different consoles, and we have to check for that, just because in most cases nobody knows about it, and this will definitely fail the compliance process.
Yeah, it's one of these weird things that I'm pretty sure no player would care about or would even notice. Like, why care if this thing is called a console or a system? Like, who cares? But actually, it's something that players, don't really mind. But the first parties like Sony and Microsoft, they're really particular about these things. So. And I mean, translators, well, if when they maybe just recently started doing game localization, they don't care. And like for, from common sense point of view, you'd say for a good reason, they don't care. They kind of focus on the important bits, on the conveying the emotions in the game and, making it interesting and fun. But the first parties do care. And I mean, if a system spills into a localization where it should be a console, the game doesn't pass the quality check from the first party, and the game gets delayed. And you don't want to be in that situation where your game is already late. So that's a lot of stress, actually. And yeah, these compliance is also, like Marina. It's both legal, it's also security. Like for big clients we work with, AAA clients, the security requirements are very, very high. Like there would be these, USB sticks that are shipped around. So every part of the team, no matter where they work physically in Japan or Korea or whatever, they have these, physical tokens that, all the data is stored there, something like that. So it's like, things you would see in spy movies and stuff. Mm-hmm. So sometimes we have to go, those lengths, of course, to satisfy our customers. And, age risk compliance, right? There are more risks for AAA companies doing stuff for PC and console. So if there is any risk that the game may not pass the target age rating, then they would rather play it safe and, reduce it. So in terms of localization, that means we need to be extra careful following the guidelines that Marina mentioned, like that those specifications that have 70 questionnaires for our clients, So they have these parts about, what do we do with swearing, with swear words? What do we do with, I don't know, sex references? What do we do with, this historical references or whatever? I mean, if they're there in the original content. So these are important bits, I think, and we had to consult our clients sometimes as for, LGBT themes. For in certain territories, it's not desirable to highlight those topics, so we may unfortunately have to advise our clients to be more, risk averse and recommend to tone things down a bit, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and in terms of language, it's very tricky now because those inclusive language practices that could be easily adapted in English, in most languages, they just don't exist. And they are very controversial. And if the client wants the game to be inclusive in terms of language, like adding they or adding a feminine character, and in English, it's very, very easy. It's you, and you and you and all they. But in most languages that have gender as part of linguistics, it's very hard to achieve. And the newer inclusion language practices are not very really well perceived by the players. And it's all kinds of chaoses in several games. We've already had like some. In German, there are two principles that are controversial, that don't agree with each other, principles of inclusive languages, and the players were not very happy about that. Mm. There were like three groups of players. The two were not happy with each other, and the third was not happy with inclusive language as it is. It was a nightmare.
I do have one last question as we are reaching that hour mark. What advice do you guys have for aspiring professionals who are looking to pursue a career in this field, in game localization?
Localization is great. If you love languages, if you love other countries, other cultures, if you like to explore, localization is great, but keep in mind that it's less romantic than you could think. There are a lot of guidelines. There are a lot of like norms, and sometimes we're working just like factory producing the text, mm-hmm. and it's a really underappreciated part of the game development. And for some people, it's very difficult to cope with that.
Yeah, for aspiring people who want to get into game localization, my number one recommendation would be research what game localization is. It's so easy now to have access to all kinds of information, and you have ChatGPT version 4 on top now.
Mm-hmm.
So which makes things even easier. I mean, don't trust it with everything, but just in case. Game localization is a peculiar thing, right? So there are things like limits to how long text strings can be, and there are these, complications arising from different, language genders that exist or don't exist in different languages, and basic things like German is longer than English, right? So, you need to remember, keep these things in mind. And in video game localization, you always work from the client's brief. You always work from the client's, requirements. So you need to be prepared for that, because sometimes we see very creative localizations that just don't fit the technical requirements bill, and that's unfortunate. And I think I imagine you can teach this, but it's still, unfortunately, clients pay a lot of attention to those things, and especially like first party terminology, like will Microsoft red flag this and the game will get delayed. This is very important. So yeah, I would say research what game localization is, and then when you apply for, say, task job, when you apply for job placement and internships and stuff, keep that in mind. Ask questions, be more proactive. Like, don't take things for granted. Always, if you don't understand something, double check, ask a question, jump on another call. Things like that. Add notes to why you have translated it this way or the other. Be kind of braver. That's very important.
All right. Well, I want to thank on behalf of the listeners and viewers out there for you both coming on. This is the part of the podcast where I shut up, hand the mic over to you guys to give attention to let the people know out there how to find you guys on social media and so on and so forth. Take it away.
Right. I would probably use this in the first place to be useful to our potential clients, to game developers, but because I think the majority of your audience are game developers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Indie developers, team members of big companies and stuff. So I would definitely recommend paying attention to localization engineering early on when you start working in your game. Like do simple stuff like do mock translations. Early in the game where you just started production, translate this automatically with Google Translate or whatever, and then just see how the stuff looks in other languages that you think may be important in your game, right? To see that that it's technically supported. Like, think about how you store your text strings. Don't have them embedded in the code. Have them, have a good architecture to store those text strings, because these things will be very, very difficult and painful to fix at the end. If you can, maybe don't use super specific, super customized fonts, because otherwise, what if you decide to add, Cyrillic supporting languages or things like that, and your language only supports Western European character sets, characters. So then what do we do? Do we replace this beautiful font with something that looks out of place, or do you spend extra money on somebody to develop a similar font for Cyrillic characters, So or things like, thinking proactively even about the territories you want to go into, because sometimes we see people just think they focus on one or two territories, but they haven't done research in their game genre, and they would be surprised to learn that this genre is popular in Korea or it's popular in Brazil. So that might change your project schedule and project budget as well. So have the money budgeted for localization early on, and you think about localization testing as well. Who's going to do that? Do you have the resources to do it yourself? ideally you don't want to, you don't want to have it done by, just your friends and college teachers of a certain language or something. That's not a good practice. So you probably want to have it done professionally. But then, you need to figure out how you're going to check quality, because I think one of the biggest challenges we have, it's good we're talking about this now, because I think the biggest challenge I face as a founding partner of a service provider is not only for localization, but for other services too, but localization specifically, especially, there is such a big focus on price. And I'm not saying price is not important. Of course it is important. You only have so much money to spend, right? But it can't be the only thing, It's very often it's like, oh, we should go with the cheapest, or something like that. It's horrible, because even I'm as an independent developer, one of the games I made in a startup, we had a European publisher, and the publisher wanted the game I was making to be localized in 4 languages. And I said, hey, I have this localization team. They're really good. They know what they're doing. And the publisher said, no. We've got our own guys. We'll go with them. And then I said, look, but let us at least do the localization testing bit. And he said, okay, you can have the localization testing. So that was good. But it turned out that the German was so bad, we had to retranslate it from scratch. Italian, French, and Spanish were very bad and needed to be edited, all of it. And the publisher then had to pay us to do the edits. So in the end, the publisher paid probably around 50% more than originally budgeted, right? And instead, they could have just paid 10% more for us to do the job and not have it redone, So the general advice is be smart about it. Think, what are the actual important bits for you? If quality matters for a game, which not is always the case, but what is quality for you? Do you want the game to be fun? Do you want to, what things are important? Maybe the technical things are more important, or it can be very different, but for different games. But have a process in place to test your vendors before you choose them. Don't ever rely on just references, marketing pitches and stuff like that. This is not a good way. The only way is to have a proper test job, and maybe even don't tell people it's a test job. Just send them a bunch of files to localize, and give them a tight deadline, and see how they fare with that, and then have a process to assess the quality of that, and then assess other things like how fast it was, how good the service was, how quick the guys replied. Did they recommend stuff? Did they recommend things to be changed and adapted for different territories and stuff? So this is the important bits. Were they proactive? Were they nice to deal with? So I think this is the most important bit. You can definitely, we're called Allcorrect. You can find us pretty much anywhere on the web. We have an Instagram. We have all kinds of social media presence and everything. I won't go into too much detail there. You can even really search it all. But basically, Allcorrect is one word, or even 2 words. Allcorrect Group is the name of the group of companies, and we do all of these services that help you ship the game and players have fun with it.
Yeah, I just want to add that we were nominated for Mobile Games Awards, and Dennis asked us to pitch that. And
we actually were. Yeah. We're looking forward to the actual award ceremony. So we don't know if we make it to first place or second place or something, but it's already cool that we're in the shortlist of nominations for that award, which is pretty awesome. And it's all because of the team. And you can go, and I really love when clients credit the team. So if I go on Moby Games and I type Allcorrect, I say, we're in Jedi Fallen Orders, credits, and we're in this, Trials game, and there's this Crew game, and there's, Anthem and stuff. And I'm like, and it's not like Allcorrect and Demid Tishin. Demid Tishin is not even there, there's Marina there, or maybe not even Marina. There will be project managers there, and translators and editors and testers and the subject matter experts. And these are the guys who deserve it. They're really, I'm really proud of them, and they're really proud of their job. And it's great when I see them credited there. It's so rewarding.
Yeah, definitely. I think in all aspects of game development, more recognition is just going to help. Yeah, it's just one of those things that audio overall is always like the last team to touch anything, and then localization is like a part of that.
It's like the end of the credits.
Yeah. So I definitely empathize with the type of timetables that you guys get at the end of game development. It's pretty stressful and admirable.
I think clients are getting better in this. Clients, I think there is a trend. I think so. Yeah, I think like guys like Ubisoft and EA are getting better at crediting, like their localization teams on their on mobile game, like in their games. It's not the case really with mobile games, which is the biggest. We need to remember it's the biggest market now, but there is no place for credits usually. Unless it's an indie game or like a narrative-heavy game, you wouldn't normally have credits at all, which is a pity. And I think it must be changed, because all of the designers need to be credited. Everybody. Programmers and artists and all of these amazing people.
Mm-hmm. It's true. Yeah, I wouldn't even know where to find the credits on mobile games. There's no end credit scene. Yeah, you're right. Well, I want to thank you guys for coming on. Hopefully that hour is painless. I've definitely learned a lot. It was a topic that I was very interested in. Being in the industry for so long. Yeah, it's amazing to still find holes or gaps in my knowledge about the game industry or different departments and disciplines.
Thanks.
Yeah, I want to thank you both for coming on and sharing that knowledge. As always, all the description and links will be provided in each episode summary, so you can find Allcorrect and information on Demid and Marina if you want to get in touch with them. Other than that, that's it. I'll see you guys all next week.
Thanks. Have fun making games.